What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another MRL format video. And in today's video, we're going to be covering a deck that I think is uniquely playable in this format, and that is Stall Mill. Although, as you'll see in these games, the deck can be pretty fast-paced, or at least more fast-paced than Mill has been in the past. But before we discuss what makes this deck tick, if you're not already subscribed to my channel, please be sure to subscribe. At the time of recording, we have 360 subscribers, and I'd really like to reach 400 by the end of January. So if you're not already subscribed and you enjoy my content, please be sure to do that. We'll also be probably transitioning into the next format relatively soon, unless people want a lot more coverage on MRL format. So if you want to stay up to date on when that happens, subscribing will let you do that. In addition, if you're interested in playing any of the formats that I've covered in my videos for yourself, or testing out the next format before I actually start making videos on it, we've got a Discord server where you can join up and duel people who also want to test out these underexplored formats. It's a lot of fun. Highly recommend you check it out if you're interested. And of course, as always, if you enjoy the video, please be sure to leave a like down below. But with all that out of the way, let's discuss this Mill deck. Now, Mill is one of the decks entering the format that I really wanted to make work, as 3 Cyberjar can make for some very explosive Mill turns. Basically, the goal of this deck is to build up your opponent's hand with things like Cyberjar and Trunade to bounce back their back row, and then have massive card destructions, just having them draw tons and tons of cards from their deck and decking them out that way. And this can happen quite frequently when playing this deck, which is pretty good. Unfortunately, the deck does have a bit too many moving parts, in my opinion, to make it the most consistent thing in the world, and so I don't think it's the best. I think it's probably tier 2 at best, but that doesn't mean that it can't be very fun to play. And also, this is just my experimentation and tinkering with the deck. I'm sure if other people tried their hand at this, they could figure out different sort of builds that can sort of maximize the consistency and power of this deck. But this is what I came up with in my testing of it. So going into the card by card here, we of course have 3 Cyberjar, which is very, very important. Building up your opponent's hand and also clearing their field can be very, very strong. And also being able to recycle this with something like Spear Cretin, which is another backbone of this deck, is very, very powerful. Spear Cretin is one of the most essential parts of this deck, not only because it can recycle Cyberjar, but because it can recycle many of your other powerful flip monsters. Things like Magician of Faith, which can be used to get back card destructions from the graveyard and make another card destruction play. Things like Man-Eater Bug, which can pop your opponent's monsters, which can be very helpful at stemming an aggressive push if they get a lot of monsters on board from a Cyberjar activation. And it can even be used to recycle itself, forming what many call the Spear Cretin loop, where basically your opponent keeps attacking into Spear Cretin and it keeps replacing itself with a different Spear Cretin, which then prevents them from actually attacking in. Now, this loop can backfire. For instance, if they have a Cannon Soldier in the grave, this is a great way for them to fill up their field to then tribute off and deal a ton of damage. But if they don't have an option like this available to them, Spear Cretin can be very strong. However, it is a card that you have to play very carefully with, and that can easily backfire on you. In addition, the deck is also playing 2 Witch of the Black Forest, 2 Sangan, of course, to search out whatever flip monster you might need at a given time. These can also bait out things like Raigeki or Darkhole, which can give you a really tough time in this deck. But that's going to do it for the monster lineup. I think that you could potentially add more monsters, as if you do a Cyberjar flip and you get no monsters from it, then that can be very, very devastating for you. But I also think that you kind of need to fill up your deck with other cards that can serve as the main combo pieces for you. So let's dive into those. For these spell cards, we of course have 2 card destruction here. This is sort of the backbone of the deck, the main way you're fulfilling your win condition. So very, very strong. We've got 2 copies, which can help us with consistency. And also, if we need to, we can also dump it into the graveyard with something like Painful Choice, which I think is very, very essential in this deck. When you have a combo deck like this with so many moving pieces and so many ways to get things back from the graveyard, whether it be Magician of Faith for spell cards or Spear Cretin for monsters, I think that Painful Choice can be very, very good at giving you very good graveyard setup. It's also great first turn if you don't have any of the monsters that you need. What you can do is you can Painful Choice, send 4 Recruiters and something like a Cyberjar, and have a great first turn set, which can be very, very important. For the other spells, we're actually not playing all 5 of the Power 5 limited spells. We're only playing Darkhold, Raigeki, and Pot of Greed. Monster Reborn and Change of Heart just don't do enough for us. Yes, we could potentially Change of Heart and opponent's Magician of Faith, which could be very nice, but that's a very niche scenario that won't often come up, and it's just a dead card otherwise, and this deck so rarely goes for damage wins that's not really worth it. Monster Reborn, there's nothing really that useful to reborn here, as most of the monsters that you want to bring back from the graveyard are flip monsters. You could reborn a Recruiter potentially, but if you're just using it to reborn a Recruiter, you might as well just cut the card and replace it with something that is a bit more effective in more situations. Another very important spell for the combo is Giant Trunade. Now, Giant Trunade is very important at beefing up your opponent's hand as well, as once they figure out you're on a sort of mill deck, they're likely going to set a lot of cards in their back row. Trunade can bounce those cards back to hand, and then make your card destruction plays even better. Trunade can also play extremely well with another spell card that we're playing, which is Swords of Revealing Light. Now, you may have noticed in my coverage of some other decks that a lot of decks have started cutting this card, as there are things like Mystical Space Typhoon that have been added to the format that make this card a lot worse. But I think that this deck in particular definitely wants to play Swords of Revealing Light. Cutting off all their opponent's aggressive pressure and also being able to recycle this with Trunade is very, very nice and can come up quite often. In addition, the deck is playing things like Magic Jammer and Solemn Judgment to potentially stop your opponent's spell and trap removal if you need to. So that makes playing things like Swords of Revealing Light a lot less risky than it would be in some other decks potentially. For the last of the spells, we have a Forceful Sentry, and this is maybe a card you could cut, but I do actually really like it in the deck. Oftentimes when you make your big card destruction push, you won't be able to go entirely for game, but you're hoping to snipe a lot of powerful cards out of their hands and potentially cut them off from being able to stop your later pushes with things like Cyberjar and card destruction again. Forceful Sentry can be very good after you do a card destruction play, at sort of checking to see if your opponent has any problematic cards that they drew off the card destruction and sending them back into the deck. Yes, it does beef up their deck by 1 card, but honestly this deck is so explosive with its mill pushes that 1 card very rarely matters in the end. For the traps, I already mentioned the Magic Jammers and the Solemns, but these are very, very important. You want to be able to shut down as many of your opponent's power plays as possible to prevent your opponent from disrupting your powerful mill plays. We are also playing 3 Woboku here, as it is chainable to things like Heavy Storm, Mystical Space Typhoon, and it's also very good if you get unlucky with a Cyberjar rip and your opponent gets a ton of offensive pressure. You want to have a Woboku on field. Now, you'll notice that we're not actually playing a Mirror Force in the main deck. I think it could be a powerful inclusion in the main deck. You could definitely include it. But honestly, I felt like it didn't do enough for me, and dying to things like Mystical Space Typhoon made it not as worth as something like Woboku, for instance. Oftentimes, when I draw Mirror Force, I would have wanted another card instead, and the deck is already playing about 40 cards, and it is a combo deck, which means that it does want to get its combo pieces. So I decided not to include Mirror Force in the deck. I think you could definitely include in the deck if you wanted to in future iterations. This is just my personal choice with it. Moving on to the side deck, we actually have a different inclusion from the mill deck that I showed off in my guide for the format, as one Discord user, Disaster Area, actually pointed out that my choice of Prevent Rat as a 2k defender didn't actually have the least amount of attack, which is why I initially included it. So we are playing Cocoon of Evolution as our 2k defender of choice if we do just need to get more defensive here. You know, we don't play 2k defenders in the main deck because Snatch Steal's at 3 copies, but our opponent will likely side out of Snatch Steals in games 2 and 3, which can make this a good inclusion. We also have 3 Mask of Darkness here. If our opponent is on a bit more of a counter trap strategy, we can use this to bring back counter traps of our own, which can be very useful. We also have 3 Bistro Butchers, which, you know, I don't really like this card in the mill deck, but we can use it to buff up our opponent's hand more, and if we do need offensive pressure, then this can be useful in that regard. Lastly, we have 3 Gravekeeper's Servant and 3 Messenger of Peace. I don't like either of these in the main deck, as I think they're actually a bit too situational. Gravekeeper's Servant just doesn't mill fast enough for my liking, and so that's why we're not really playing in the main. If our opponent is on like a Recruiter strategy, for instance, where they've got a lot of smaller monsters attacking in, this can be good to bring in just to bring us closer to our win condition, and also potentially cut them off from powerful spells that they might mill. But overall, I don't really know how I feel about this deck. As a note, people pointed out that you can play it with Banisher of the Light to basically prevent your opponent from attacking entirely, which is true, but I think that's way too fragile a combo to actually be that consistent. And again, I think it just mills too slowly for my tastes. So we've got it in the side deck. You could maybe try it in the main deck if you want. I have. It was very underwhelming for me. But that was just my experience. Maybe you'll have different luck with it. Lastly, the Messenger of Peace here is if our opponent's on a bit more of a beat stick deck, playing the sort of Jirai Gumo Megamorph deck that I showed off in my last video. This can be very good at putting a damper on that. But that's going to do it for the deck breakdown. You of course should probably have a fusion deck here just for the mind games, but this is the bare bones of the deck as I've figured it out. I think there's definitely room for improvement in the future, and I hope that people do try tinkering with this, as it is a strategy that I really want to see succeed in this format, as when the next limited list comes around, Cyberjar will be limited down to 1, so you won't be able to play this deck at this power level in the next format, which is somewhat unfortunate. But while we've got Cyberjar at 3, we've got to try playing this deck at least once, so let's see how it does. Okay, we've got a game against Ratos here, who has been featured on the channel in the past in my coverage of previous formats, and who has been one of the people who has been sort of grinding this format the most in the Discord, and really figuring out what cards are good and what cards are bad, and optimizing the best deck lists in it. So, awesome to have them on the channel here, and it'll be interesting to see what they have here. I think they're playing a build in this video that is not the final build that they've come to, but is still just a generic sort of good stuff build. And we, of course, are playing the mill deck. So I think this will be a good showing of what the mill deck can do if we are actually able to win. So let's see how we do here. We are able to win the rock, paper, scissors, which is very important. Let's see if we get a good opener. We will be going first here. Let's see what we draw. Solemn. Okay. We draw 2 off the pot. And we're going to say damn in the chat, trying to bluff that, you know, we're playing a bunch of hand rips and we just didn't draw them. Just trying to get some mind games out there. We'll set the Cyberjar, set a Waboku, set a Solemn, and pass back to them. No reason to set the Spear Cretin yet, as we've got no monsters engraved to recycle with it. And we do have the Waboku if they do flip up the Cyberjar and get a big offensive push there. And we've got the Solemn for if they've got anything to disrupt this. So we're feeling pretty good about this. They're going to Pot of Greed. Let's see what they get. And they're going to Forceful Sentry, so they will be able to see our hand here. Unfortunately, it's not that good. I mean, I think they're probably going to shuffle back the Spear Cretin to prevent us from recycling the Cyberjar. But, you know, painful Solemn, not the best hand. So, you know, not too many power cards to send back. They're going to bring out a Mechanical Chaser, and they're going to try attacking in here. It is a Cyberjar, so we'll be able to pop the Mechanical Chaser and get a new board here. They are going to get a Faith, Tomato, and Witch, along with Change of Heart and Duo, which are 2 pretty good cards. We're going to get 2 Spear Cretins, which isn't the best, but if they don't have a way to clear both at the same time, then we can potentially just crash one and get back the Cyberjar and flip up the other to make sure that it triggers when the Cyberjar pops. Swords, Forceful, and Waboku are all 3 great ones, although if they do manage to duo them out of our hand, then we won't be able to make use of them. So we're going to each set up our respective boards here. Since we just have 2 Spear Cretins, there's no point shuffling them up. Let's see what they do. They're going to bring out a Witch in attack mode. We are going to add the remaining cards to our hand. They are going to likely set the Magician of Faith, and they are going to summon out the Mystic Tomato there. They're going to add Change of Heart and Duo to hand and set the Magician of Faith. They're going to Duo away. Let's see what they hit, and they're going to roll to see what they select. They're going to hit one of our painful choices, and that's perfectly fine. We'll just send the other one, as we already have a pretty decent graveyard setup. You know, all we really need is the Cretin and the Cyberjar, and that's what we've got. So, feeling pretty good about that. They're just going to set 2 pass back to us. We draw a Magic Jammer, which is a great draw here. Since they have left a monster in attack mode, we're just going to try flipping up the Spear Cretin, crashing it into the Witch to get the Cyberjar back online here. And that is indeed what we're going to do. And they'll get back a Mechanical Chaser. That's perfectly fine. We're going to flip up the Spear Cretin, so that way if they do trigger the Cyberjar effect, then we will be able to get a monster back with it. We're going to set the Magic Jammer just in case. And we're going to think about what we want to do here, because we're not too afraid of offensive pressure. But, you know, we might as well sort of like just to see what they get back and prevent them from getting back like a Change of Heart after they use one already. So we are just going to Swords now to force out the Magician of Faith activation. They'll probably get back like a Pot of Greed or a Duo, but neither of those cases we're not too torn up about that. And also we do have the Forceful Sentry to send it back into the deck. So we might as well do this now. And they will indeed get back that Pot of Greed. We're going to Forceful, send it back into the deck. See what they've got. They've got Pot and then 4 monsters. And honestly, if they trigger a Cyberjar of their own, we're perfectly fine with that. So we're just going to have them send back the Pot, as that could potentially draw them into something that we don't want them to have. So we'll have them do that. It will go back on top of the deck, and I think we're in a pretty good spot here. You know, we haven't gotten them to dig too deeply into their deck yet, and we don't have a card destruction on hand, but we're still feeling pretty good. They're going to Change of Heart our set Cyberjar, and they are going to flip it up, trying to hopefully get something like a Heavy Storm most likely, and get an advantageous Cyberjar pop here. We are going to hit 5 monsters, which is a major rarity in this deck, and it's kind of unfortunate as we now won't be able to trigger our Spear Cretin that we sent off the Cyberjar, as we will have a full field, and our opponent will still get to take advantage of its effect, as they will not have a full field, as they only hit 2 monsters. They also hit Heavy Storm and Dark Hole, which are 2 incredibly good cards, especially on this board that we have. So we are just going to set all of our monsters, of course, and we will just add them to hand first before setting them, so that way we can shuffle them up, so our opponent won't be able to know which one is which here. And the order doesn't really matter here. You could sort of mind game the order a little bit, but generally when I do this, I don't really consider it. I just sort of set randomly. And they will bring out Sangan, bring out a Mechanical Chaser, add Waboku, Dark Hole, and Heavy Storm to hand. Now we have some cards that are a bit worrying, but we do have negates for it, luckily, so it's not the worst thing in the world. And they're going to get back the Mechanical Chaser, trigger the Witch to search here. And now they get a pretty stacked hand if we do manage to get a card destruction. They're going to try heavying, and we are going to Magic Jammer that. This way we have the Solemn free if their remaining set is a Solemn, as we really don't want them to Heavy Storm this board away. We're going to think about what we discard, and we're actually going to discard a Waboku here. I think maybe this is a bit of a mistake. Yes, we do have a Waboku on field already, but it's always good to potentially have another. But I think saving the Solemn is also good, as we can then use it to prevent a powerful play later on. So it's tough to say. They are now going to think about what to do here and try Dark Holing. We have too many powerful flip monsters that we don't want this Dark Hole to succeed, so we are just going to negate it with a Solemn. They're going to set one, pass back to us, and we draw a Man-Eater Bug, which isn't the best right now. But honestly, I don't think we have to press our advantage here too much. If we had a card destruction engraved, then it might be worth it to flip up the Witch. But I think as is, we don't really feel the need to. It's a bit weird. We're going to set the Solemn Judgment, though, and pass back to them, just in case they have more board clears or more spell and trap removal. And they're just going to set one of their own, set another, pass back to us. And we do draw card destruction here. So we actually can make a potentially big push with this. The question is whether we want to or not. And I think we definitely do. Because if we can flip up this Cyberjar, get them up to 10 cards in hand, that would be very, very good and be a very powerful card destruction. It could just end the game, honestly. But in ordering this play, it is a bit tricky, as we do have the Magician of Faith set, and we would like to recycle the card destruction with the Magician of Faith. So I think what we're actually going to do here is try to fill up their hand as much as possible by triggering the Sangan to add a card back to hand, and then card destructioning, and then trying to flip up the Magician of Faith to get card destruction back, and flipping up the Cyberjar after that point, which could potentially kill them. We will have to see how the math actually works out, but we're going to think about this for a second. We're going to flip up the Man-Eater Bug, and we actually do make a mistake here. We should have popped the Sangan instead of the set, in my opinion, as they could potentially have like a Mirror Force or Waboku here that will prevent us from actually attacking over the Sangan. So I actually think this is a mistake, but luckily it is just a Man-Eater Bug. We were trying to snipe a Sangan to get them to search that out, but unfortunately it wasn't that. We are just going to flip out our Sangan, try attacking into theirs, and luckily that does go through, so they will get a search here, which brings them one card closer to death, and I think we should be able to win this turn. Main phase 2, we are going to card destruction here. If they did have a Solemn or a Magic Jam for this, we've got a Solemn of our own. So that makes the saving the Solemn play earlier make a bit more sense, and I think it's a bit rewarded here. They will draw 6 there. We're going to flip up the Magician of Faith to add back that card destruction here. Then we are just going to Cyberjar the board away, clear everything, and they're going to hit 4 spells in one monster, which is very good for us as their hand will be very stacked. They see the writing on the wall, and so they just admit defeat. And I think that shows how powerful this deck can be, especially game 1 when decks are not prepared for it. If you are able to get this setup in place and stall long enough to be able to pull off your major card destruction push, then you can just kill your opponent basically out of nowhere, as what happened that game. However, the deck can be very tricky, as you did see that we sort of had to figure out a very non-intuitive line there to guarantee the game that turn. So this deck definitely isn't a deck for the faint of heart, and it can be very tough to play, which you might see in this game 2 as well. We're going to go into that game 2. It's very likely that our opponent has prepared a bit more for us, but even if you're prepared, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be able to win, especially when we draw 2 counter traps in the opener. Now, they do have a Forceful Sentry for that, so they will be able to see our hand and potentially spin some things back. They're going to send back the Witch, which is probably the right choice, as this prevents us from getting a Cyberjar. So, kind of unfortunate for us, but I like the traps that we have in hand. And then they duo, so we will be forced to discard some cards here, which is quite unfortunate. They're going to hit the Solemn, and we're going to think about what we want to discard here. We're actually going to discard the Magic Jammer, as we're already on very low resources, so we might not be able to have a card in hand to discard for its cost. So, they're just going to set 2, pass back to us. And we draw Swords, which is pretty good. I don't think we need to activate it yet, so we're just going to set the bug, set these Swords in Waboku, pass back to them. This is playing a bit into Heavy Storm, but if they do have the Heavy Storm, we do have the Waboku for that, so it's not the worst thing in the world. And they're going to bring out a Witch. That's okay. Not what we want to pop, of course, but it looks like we won't get to pop anything, as they will flip up a Man-Eater Bug of their own and pop our Man-Eater Bug. They're going to attack in for 1550 here. And they're just going to pass back to us. They're in a pretty good position. We draw Forceful, which isn't the best, but we are going to activate Swords here and just pass back to them. If they've got Spell and Trap removal, they can clear the Swords, but we do have Waboku for that. It's not the worst thing in the world. I think we want to save the Forceful Sentry for if we do manage to pop there with the Black Forest, or if they draw a bunch off of a Cyberjar activation. They're just going to switch their monster to defense, set 1. We draw Trunade, which will be very good at recycling that Sword of Revealing Light if we need to. We set that just in case they have a duo that they don't want to use when we only have 1 card in hand. And that's a bit risky as it does play into heavy, but given how much they're setting, I don't think it's too much of a risk. They're going to pass back to us. Swords is at 2 now, and we are going to Trunade here just to recycle that Swords, so that way we get a couple more turns off of it, which will be very nice. We also get 2 Forceful Sentry here, as now they have a full hand. And this is a pretty good hand on their part. They've got Raigeki, 7 Tools, Gumo, Reborn, and Megamorph. Of these, we don't really care too much about the Gumo, Reborn, or Megamorph, as we've got a pretty solid defensive lineup in our hand. But 7 Tools and Raigeki can give us a bit of trouble. I think we want to take the Raigeki here, as if we do draw a flip monster, we don't want them to just Raigeki that away. So that is what we're going to send back. And we just got to play around 7 Tools in the future. We are going to activate Swords, set a Waboku, pass back to them. No need to commit both Wabokus to field if they do draw the heavy. And they're just going to set 2, pass back to us. We draw Sandgam, which is pretty good. We'll summon that out and just attack into their Man-Eater Bug. If they have a way to clear this, we don't really care about that. And this way, if they do have like Cannon Soldier in the deck, this is 1 less activation of Cannon Soldier. They will just set another pass back to us. Swords is at 2 now. We are going to switch Sandgam to defense, pass back to them. And maybe we should have set another Waboku, as if they do have Heavy Storm, they can chain their 7 Tools to our Waboku here. But it's not the worst thing in the world. They're going to activate Forceful here and see 2 Wabokus, so they will be able to send back 1. They're just going to set a card, pass back to us. We draw another Sandgam, which is pretty good. We'll set that Sandgam, set a Waboku here, pass back to them. This way, if they make a major push and try to negate one of our Wabokus, we still have the other. So it's not the worst thing in the world here. And they're going to think about what to do. They're just going to switch their witch to attack, flip up the cannon soldier, and attack into our two monsters. We'll Sandgan search for a Cyberjar, which I think is pretty good here. And they're going to hit our other monster, so we're going to add a Spear Cretin. Now, if they have Duo here, that's really unfortunate for us. But if they don't, I think we're in a pretty good spot for next turn. They're just going to set one pass back to us, and we draw Magician of Faith, which is another great flip monster here. Unfortunately, we don't really have too much that we'd want to get back. The swords could be good, and the Trunade could also be good, but I think we can save the Faith for later. We'll set the Cyberjar and hope that they attack into it. They are indeed going to attack into it. Hopefully this draws us some good cards here. We draw a Cretin, which is pretty nice, and we draw a bunch of powerful spells. They will get a Solemn and two monsters that are pretty decent. They will be able to get the Change of Heart, but that doesn't really help against a Cretin. The Pot of Greed can also help, and the Solemn can also help against our powerful spells, but I'm still feeling pretty good about this. The Cretin can be used to get back the Cyberjar later, which will be very nice. And they're going to bring out the Tomato and the Gumo and attack. They're going to grab Pot of Greed, Change of Heart, and Solemn. We're going to grab Trunade, Raigeki, Forceful Sentry, and Dark Hole, all of which are pretty good. And they've got to decide whether they want to attack here. They are going to attack in, so we are just going to get back our Cyberjar here. They do get back Cannon Soldier, which is a bit worrying, but we've got the board clears to make that fine. They're going to Pot of Greed here. If they draw like a Raigeki or something to deal with our Cyberjar, then it's pretty rough. I mean, they can always just Change of Heart the Cyberjar and tribute off with the Cannon Soldier, which would be bad. Looks like that is what they're going to do here, which is a very good play on their part. They're going to set another pass back to us. We draw Card Destruction, which is very nice, and we potentially do have a good line here. We could try to Raigeki or Darkhold. They're likely going to use up their counter traps on that, and then we can Giant Trunade to buff up their hand and Card Destruction that way. It is a bit risky as it doesn't kill them this turn, and so I'm not sure I necessarily want to do it. But I think we definitely want to try and get these board clears going here. We're going to start with the Trunade, actually. I guess we're trying to prioritize the board clears over our big discard push. And they are going to indeed Solemn that, which is the right choice. So they're going to drop down to 3,500. We're going to try board clearing here, and we do manage to succeed. They will get a search off the Sandgan, adding a Magician of Faith, which is pretty good. We could just Forceful Sentry just to check what they've got, and that might be worth it. Or we could set Magician of Faith, go for a Card Destruction here. Then we could potentially get back the Card Destruction later and go for another Card Destruction. It's kind of tough, though. We might want to set the Cretin instead to get back the Cyberjar to buff up their hand more for our Card Destruction play. And it's kind of iffy. And this is what makes this deck so hard to play. There are a lot of different lines that you could go for, and it can be very tough deciding which ones you do. We are going to just set the Magician of Faith, set the Raigeki, and set a Card Destruction, figuring that they're not going to use something like a Heavy Storm here. So we're going to pass back to them. They've got a Mystical Space Typhoon, and they do manage to hit our Raigeki. That's very unfortunate, but we do have the Magician of Faith to get it back, hopefully. But then they Darkhold Magician of Faith, which is very rough for us. They're going to bring out Mechanical Chaser and equip it with Megamorph, and we are just going to try to use a Waboku here at the start step of the battle phase to dodge around a 7 tools, as if they do 7 tools this, we can then use a Waboku when they declare their attack. So they are going to let that go through because they do know that that will work that way, and they're just going to pass back to us. 3,700 is a lot here, so it's a bit iffy. Giant Trunade is great. We could Giant Trunade their board back, use a Card Destruction to have them discard 7, which would be pretty nice. And we could also set a Spear Cretin to get back a Magician of Faith or a Cyberjar for later. But we might want to save this play for when we can get back the Cyberjar and buff up their hand even more. So we're going to think about this, and we are actually going to bide our time a little bit. Setting the Spear Cretin, setting the Trunade, passing back to them. They're just going to attack into our Cretin here, and we are just going to get back a Cyberjar, as we don't really want to do the Cretin loop, as they do have a Cannon Soldier in graveyard here. They're going to get back that Cannon Soldier, and they're going to actually attack into the Cyberjar here, so that will clear their board away. We will get 5 here. They're going to get 5 there. They do draw a Solemn, which will mess with our Card Destruction plays a little bit, but it looks like they don't have more monsters than we do here, so we will be able to get our monsters on board and protect ourselves from a bit of damage here. So we're just going to set these in no particular order. They're going to likely make an offensive push here, but unfortunately our hand isn't the best now, but I think we're still doing fine. They're going to bring out a Mechanical Chaser, a Sangan, and they're going to add the remaining to hand: Heavy Storm, Mystical Space Typhoon, and Solemn Judgment. That heavy can be pretty bad if they are willing to heavy their own back row. We don't really have a counter to that. We just gotta hope that they don't. They're going to attack into our Magician of Faith, which is a very good attack here, as we will be forced to use it before we do the card destruction play here. We're just going to add back a Raigeki, and they're going to Mystical Space Typhoon, and they will hit the card destruction, which is very unfortunate for us, as we really did want to use that to get them down to a very low hand size here. They're then going to Reborn the Cannon Soldier here. Set one, set another, and pass back to us. We do have True Nade, so that will force them to use a Solemn on that. So I feel pretty good doing that. And then we Painful Choice here. And I think this is a major, major misplay on our part. I think that this may actually cost us the game here, as at this point we are still above our opponent in terms of cards in deck. Playing the Painful drops us below them. We do have card destruction, but they have been playing around card destruction very well throughout the course of this game. And so I think this Painful is actually the wrong choice here. I think we should have just held it, potentially not even used it for the rest of the game, as we're in a very good position. But instead we do the Painful, and I think it will cost us the game. We send a bunch of monsters off of it as well, which is very much not good. I think what we want to do is try guaranteeing game through damage by just Raigeking away their board and getting in with our witches and a monster. But this won't quite do it, so I think this is a big mistake on our part. They'll give us the bug, and that definitely doesn't enable us to get in for the full 3,500. We are going to True Nade here. They do have Solemn, so if we do manage to clear their board and attack in, then we're still doing pretty good. But unfortunately, they have another Solemn, and I think this is just the end of the game. Our offensive push failed. They can get back a spell with the Magician of Faith, so we will be forced to just flip up the Witch here, deciding whether we want to flip up the other Witch as well to attack into Sangan, and it looks like we will do that. We're going to attack into their Magician of Faith. They will get back a Monster Reborn, which is very bad for us. We'll attack into the Sangan, drop them down 100 more, and they'll add back a Magician of Faith there. We do have the Forceful Sentry to deal with what they have in hand. They've got a Heavy, Reborn, Gumo, and Faith. We don't need to fear the Heavy, as they can't now use 7 Tools of the Bandit, as they are below 1,000, and they also have 3 Solemn Judgment in hand. But we are going to pick Reborn, and we are going to snipe back the Heavy. This is a major mistake on my part, because I don't realize that they are below 1,000, and thus cannot use 7 Tools anymore. So we have no reason to fear Heavy here, and yet we are going to Forceful. I think this is a major mistake. I think we should have saved the Forceful for after we attacked in their Magician of Faith, and they got back a powerful spell again. Unfortunately, there isn't really much we can do here to win, in my opinion. We're going to set the Man-Eater Bug, set the Woboku here, and pass back to them. Again, this is unnecessary, as they can't actually negate it with 7 tools, so this is a very bad play on our part. They are going to Megamorph that Mechanical Chaser, switch the Cannon Soldier defense, attack into our Witch of the Black Forest here. We are going to Woboku this just to protect our life points, and they're going to set one, set another, pass back to us. And if we had the Forceful Sentry here, we could potentially just attack into the Faith and spin back whatever spell they got, but unfortunately we do not. We just draw this Solemn, which is okay, but not the best here. I think we don't really have a way to win. It's a bit tricky. We are going to just flip up the Man-Eater Bug and pop the Magician of Faith, as we are fearful of whatever they'll get. I think this is also a mistake. I think we should have flipped up the Man-Eater Bug and popped the Mechanical Chaser, as we can at least attack over Faith. We can't attack over the Chaser. So, very unfortunate. We will just set this Solemn here. And in the end phase, they are going to Sniper Woboku, so we will be taking a ton of damage here. They're going to attack into the Bug. We'll drop down to 2,700, and they'll just pass back to us. We draw Swords, which will buy us time, which isn't the worst. but this is very rough. We do have one card destruction remaining in deck, so if we do manage to get to a point where they have more cards in hand than us, then we could potentially scrape back a win here. We do draw that card destruction. If we use it now, then they'll drop down to 8 cards in deck, which doesn't quite do it. So we've just got to set the card destruction and hope that they don't have a way to clear out their hand some more. Unfortunately, they showed that they clearly do. They just set a monster, use Cannon Soldier's effect to tribute it off, and this is a way that they'll be able to just clear out their hand, prevent themselves from getting clogged up with monsters. We draw Painful Choice, which is definitely not useful in a 6-card deck, and we are just sort of biding our time, slowly dying here. They're going to set a Gumo. We draw the last monster in our deck, I believe, Man-Eater Bug, so we will be able to pop the Cannon Soldier with that, but unfortunately, it will be too little too late, in my opinion, and we do lose the swords here, as it has been 3 turns, so they can potentially make an aggressive push here. They're going to attack into our set. It is Man-Eater Bug, so we are going to pop that Cannon Soldier. They're just going to set another, pass back to us. We draw Pot of Greed. We don't really want to activate it now, as that just gets us closer to death, but we might have to, just to see if we have any way to salvage this situation here. I don't think we do, though. I think we majorly backed ourselves into a corner by activating the Painful. So we will just pass back to them, and I say in the chat that I made a critical error, because by this point I have realized that I should not have done that, and there are no targets left in deck for the Witch, so we are just very much dead here. We draw a Magic Jammer. We're going to set the Magic Jammer, set the pot, pass back to them. They're going to Reborn here, target Cannon Soldier. We will be forced to Magic Jammer that, discarding our dead Painful. They are going to Heavy. We're just going to Solemn Judgment that, so that way they can't clear a back row, but it might just be the end of the game anyways. They're going to clear our Witch, pass back to us. We draw a Painful, and even if we card destruction here, they'd still be 1 card above us in deck. We just do it anyways, as we're dead next turn no matter what, and that will just be the end of the game. So I think game 2 really showed how this deck can be very tricky to pilot, and if you pilot it wrong, then you can just lose the game. Unlike other stall decks like Burn, the deck doesn't really have an alternate win condition through damage, as you kind of need to devote deck space all to flip monsters instead of things like Cannon Soldier or anything that can allow you to make an offensive push later on in the game after your opponent's used up Solemns. So that is quite unfortunate, and it does make it so that if you do mess up your combo line, or if you do make a critical error like with the Painful Choice as I did there, then you might just be throwing the game away. So I think that we could have potentially just won the match then and there in game 2, but unfortunately we did not, and hopefully we'll be able to make up for that in game 3. We are going to actually switch up our deck a little bit here, siding in some Masks of Darkness, as we did see that they were on some counter traps there. So we figured that we can recycle our counter traps as a good countermeasure to that. But let's see how we do here. We are going to go first, as we did lose. So let's see what we get. We draw Card Destruction and Faith very early on, which is very, very nice for us. We're just going to set the Man-Eater Bug, set a Solemn, and set a Waboku here. Also setting the card destruction. We've got the Solemn in case they have a Heavy. If they hand rip us, that is very unfortunate here, but nothing we can really do about that. I mean, I guess we could Solemn that, but I don't really think it's worth it. They're just going to bring out a Mechanical Chaser, though. Attack into our set monster. It is a bug, so we will be able to pop that Mechanical Chaser. Main phase 2, they do have the Forceful Sentry here. They are going to spin back our Magician of Faith, which is quite unfortunate. And they're just going to set 1 and pass. We draw Dark Hole, which isn't the most useful for us. We're just going to set the Forceful Sentry, pass back to them. They're going to set 1 of their own, set another, pass back to us. We draw a Sandgan, which can be pretty good. We're just going to set the Sandgan, pass back to them. And they have a bug, so they will be able to pop our Spear Cretin, which is quite unfortunate. They're going to bring out a Witch of the Black Forest, attack into our set Sandgan here. We will be able to get a Cyber Jar, which is pretty nice. So we are going to go for that. They're going to attack in for 450 with the bug. And main 2, they're just going to set 1 more, pass back to us. We draw an additional Waboku, which isn't really the most useful for us. We're just going to set the Jar and set the Dark Hole, as we figure that off of this Cyber Jar, they could likely draw a Hand Rip, and so if they do, we want to prevent them from taking away the Dark Hole. They are going to just attack into our Jar and pop the entire board. They will get a Search off the Witch, which isn't the worst for them, but luckily it does thin their deck down a little bit. They draw... Ooh, that is a rough couple spells to draw. They will be able to heavy first, so we can Solemn that, but we won't have the Solemn left for the Raigeki. So it looks like we probably aren't going to be able to pull off the powerful flip effects that we got off of this Cyber Jar. Kind of unfortunate, but at least we will get the search off the Witch here. Oh, we also don't have any spells engraved for the Faith, I believe. Yeah, it's all monsters engraved. So actually, they could just attack into our set monsters and try and prevent us from getting the powerful effects that way. If they don't attack into our Faith, then that will still be pretty fine, as we can card Destruction next turn. But it's kind of iffy. They're going to indeed attack into our monsters, and unfortunately they do hit the Faith, and they will also hit this Witch here. So we still have the Mask, but unfortunately they do snipe our Dark Hole there with the Mystical Space Typhoon, so we don't really have a way to get back at them that way. They will activate Heavy here, and we could potentially consider using the Solemn, but we don't really have too much that we want to preserve here. The card destruction would be nice to preserve, but we don't really have a way to make full use of it yet. So we are just going to let that go through, and I'm very glad that we let that go through, because they did have a 7 tools, which would have just prevented our Solemn from doing anything. So they're going to set a couple more, pass back to us, and we draw a third Forceful. So maybe an argument to take Forceful out of the deck, even though I think it is very powerful. We are just going to activate Forceful Sentry, shuffle back the Jiraiguma that they have in hand. We're going to set 2 pass back to them. I think maybe we could have switched the Witch to attack, attacked into their Witch, and activated another Forceful. But we didn't do that, and we might get punished for that. They are going to try sniping one of our back row. It's Waboku, so we'll chain it. And they do Raigeki here. We're going to add back a Cyber Jar. And they're just going to switch the Witch to defense. And they're actually going to tribute off the Witch, which I think makes a lot of sense here. Adding a Magician of Faith, and then setting the Magician of Faith. This way they can get back the Raigeki, which is very good. And this is also the main reason why I think we should have just crashed into their Witch, had them search, and then forceful away whatever they searched. But hindsight is 20/20. It's hard to notice these things in the moment. And if they had something like Waboku, I guess it wouldn't have worked out for us. So we got to think about what we want to do here. We are going to just set the Spear Cretin instead of the Cyber Jar, as they can get back a Raigeki and then clear away our set monster. And if they don't do that, we can just get back a Cyber Jar with the Cretin. They're going to think about what they want to do here. They're going to flip up the Magician of Faith, and they are indeed going to get back that Raigeki. Activate the Raigeki, clear our Spear Cretin, summon out a Mechanical Chaser, and get in for a ton of damage here. Kind of unfortunate. They will then tribute off the Faith to deal 500 more and pass back to us. We draw Magic Jammer, but we can't afford to keep a card in hand to keep it online. We are still going to set it, because if they draw spells after the Cyber Jar flips up, then we will have cards in hand to discard. They are going to just tribute away their Cannon Soldier, keep the Mechanical Chaser on field, as they do know that we do have Cyber Jar set. So we're going to trigger Cyber Jar. We do get a couple monsters here, and they get a couple monsters of their own, but not enough to surmount ours. So we're feeling pretty good about that. We are going to get the Witch, get the Faith, set them both, and see what else we get here. They're going to bring out their monsters and attack, of course. They're getting Mystical Space Typhoon, Forceful Sentry, and Delinquent Duo. We get a Solemn, a Magic Jammer, and a Magic Jammer. So not the most proactive cards, but good if we manage to keep them around. Unlikely that we will be able to, though. We're going to Magician of Faith here, and we could get back card destruction, but it's honestly not the best right now, so we'll just get back a Dark Hole instead. They're going to attack into our set Witch as well, and let's see if they call the coin toss right. They do not, so they'll drop down by half. Unfortunately, we don't really have a way to win the game through damage, so it doesn't really matter to us. We're just going to get a Cyber Jar. They are going to Delinquent Duo here, and we could Magic Jammer this, but I think we actually have to let this go through, hoping that they don't hit either the Cyber Jar or the Dark Hole. If they do hit one of them, we can just keep the other, and then Magic Jammer the Forceful Sentry. But let's hope they don't hit either, so we have a bit more options here. They are going to roll a die, and they're going to hit the Magic Jammer, which is honestly not bad. We're going to discard another Magic Jammer as well. They're going to try to Forceful here. We are going to Magic Jammer, discarding a Solemn. They do have the 7 tools for that, unfortunately. So they will be able to see our hand. They're going to send back the Cyber Jar, which I don't think is a bad play. And they'll just set another pass back to us. we're just going to do the only play that we really have available to us right now. We're going to try dark holing the board away, and then forceful centering whatever they have left, and then setting a Magician of Faith here. They're going to Mystical Space Typhoon our last back row in the end phase. It is just a forceful sentry bluff, so it doesn't really matter to us. They're going to set one, pass back to us. We draw Mask of Darkness, which does open up an interesting possibility here. We are going to flip up the Magician of Faith here, grab back the Dark Hole, and we're going to just clear the board away just in case that is something like a Magician of Faith. And indeed it is, so we feel pretty good about that. And we could set the Mask of Darkness here to get back a trap, but we don't really have any traps that are that proactive here. So I think what we're honestly going to try to do is just get game in a couple turns, as 3 attacks with the Mask of Darkness will kill them. So if they don't draw any monsters here, which, you know, to be fair, they do seem to be playing a lot of monsters, so it's not the most unlikely thing in the world that they will draw one. But if they don't, then we can potentially just win the game here. So that's what we're going to go for. Maybe it's a bit of a gamble, but we got to do it in my opinion. And they're going to think about what they want to do on draw. They're going to summon up Mystic Tomato and activate Megamorph to get in a ton of damage here. So we're going to drop down by 1900. And Megamorph will now have their Mystic Tomato's attack down to 700. But if we attack into Mystic Tomato, they just get another monster. And if we don't draw a monster at all, that still isn't enough to kill us. So unfortunately, we gambled wrong there. And all we draw is a Trunade, which won't quite do it here. We're going to set the Trunade. Hopefully, they'll be scared by our bluff, but there's no real reason not to attack here. They're going to Pot of Greed and just attack in. And that will just be the end of the game. So the reason I wanted to show off this match for the mill deck is because game 1, I think, really shows how good the deck can be when everything goes right for it. You know, we won that game very confidently. And in game 1, you'll often be able to win very easily as your opponent's just not prepared for the mill deck in game 1. Games 2 and 3, your opponent will side deck appropriately, hopefully. But I think game 2 shows that, like, even if they side deck appropriately, you still have the potential to win through mill. And I think we would have won game 2 if we hadn't made that painful choice play. And that painful choice play does show that the deck is very difficult to pilot, you know. There are a lot of different things that you can do, and if you make one mistake, it can just be all over for you. And lastly, game 3, I think, shows how bad the deck can be when you don't draw the things that you actually need to, and also when your opponent is prepared for it. I think this third game was a perfect storm of us, you know, bricking on cards that we really wanted for other situations, like the 3 Forceful, and also our opponent being prepared for us, playing around our mill strategy, and having sided very well against us here. All that being said, I think this deck is still very fun to play if you're interested in these sort of complicated combo lines that can just kill your opponent out of nowhere. And it's really cool to see as sort of a proto version of a deck known as Empty Jar that will be coming along later, that I happen to be a big fan of. What do you think about this deck? Do you think that there are any tweaks that you would make to it to improve it? Do you think that I'm underselling this and it could actually be a tier 1 deck in the right hands? Or do you think that I'm overselling it and this deck is a lot worse than I've made it seem to be? Let me know down in the comments below. And until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.